I have packed schedules, as I know you do as well. And so I love the idea that leveraging a very high intensity workout, I can do it for a shorter amount of time with less frequency per week. And I am going to get the same, if not better, outcomes in terms of type 2 fiber preservation, lipid profiles, metabolic profiles, etc. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Better with Dr. Stephanie. It's me, your host, Dr. Stephanie Stima, and it's just me and you today, baby. We are going to be doing a solo cast on sprinting, high-intensity interval training, the hormonal cascade that follows it, and why every single perimenopausal and menopausal woman should be considering high-intensity interval training as part of their movement diversification portfolio. And I'll talk a little bit about that in today's segment as well. And today's solo cast really was inspired by an Instagram post that I did a couple weeks back. I was up in my stories and asking my community what they thought of sprinting. Do they do high intensity interval training on a regular basis? Do they like it? Do they not like it? And it was interesting because the overall response was, I hate it, I never do it, or I don't know how to do it. And so I was really surprised by that, because I think that sprinting and just generally high intensity interval training is one of the keys to aging well, along with resistance training. I think that the resistance training message, I've been hounding on it long enough now that I think that it's getting through. But I think that the sprinting stuff, surprisingly not so clear. So I thought we might go through the science today together in terms of what sprinting does, what maximal benefits it confers to longevity and health span, the hormonal impact that it has, and then, of course, some of the impacts that perimenopause and menopause with declining estrogen have on our muscle fibers, and then, of course, most importantly, what you all can do from this episode. So it's one thing to listen to the episode, it's another thing to take action from it. Let's talk about some of the cardiovascular and muscular benefits that high intensity interval training and doing things like sprinting, which is HIIT, it is a form of HIIT, can confer. So maybe I should actually define sprint intervals first. This is like maximal 100% ovaries to the wall, all out effort. This is not, your run of the mill sort of 60-minute fitness class where you're kind of sweating and you think you're working hard, but you have more in you. This is like, you feel like you are leaving it all on the bike, or you're leaving it all on the ground if you're sprinting, or in whatever fashion that you happen to be doing high intensity interval training. So when we are like true sprints, true high intensity interval, it is going to significantly improve something called your VO2 max, which is the body's ability to use oxygen during exercise. That's like the simplest way that I can sort of put it. VO2 max is often considered the gold standard of cardiorespiratory fitness. Now, of course, there are other markers, lactate threshold and type 2 fibers. But for the most part, VO2 max is the gold standard that we're going to be talking about today. And when you are pushing your lungs and your heart to the max, like that maximum all-out effort, sprinting is going to force adaptations, both in the muscle cell itself, which we're going to talk about, hormonal adaptations, and of course, just your overall, cardio, like lipid markers and metabolic markers, etc. So when we are talking about aerobic capacity and stamina, more VO2 will give you greater aerobic capacity and greater stamina across all activities, whether it's high intensity interval or endurance training. And there was a study, which I'll link in the show notes. This is specifically for women who just did 4 minutes of sprint intervals per week for a total of 12 weeks, so about 3 months. They saw greater VO2 max gains than men on the same program, which is really great because that highlights for us that high intensity interval training can be especially effective for women's cardiovascular fitness and the metabolic and hormonal adaptations, which we're going to talk about So beyond the VO2 max, when we're sprinting, it improves overall heart health and metabolic markers. So it can do things like lower your blood pressure, which tends to creep up as we age. It can improve your cholesterol profiles. They also tend to take a beating as we age. And HIIT has also been linked to reduce risk of cardiovascular disease, the number one killer for women, and improved insulin sensitivity. And this is, again, something that we don't feel insulin insensitivity sort of creeping up as we age, but it definitely happens just as a natural function of aging. If you're someone who is looking to lose weight, sprinting is also very efficient at helping you with that post-exercise caloric burn. The cool cats will call this EPOC, or excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. It's usually higher following a sprint session or following a high-intensity interval training session than moderate exercise or low, like steady-state exercise does, which means that you continue to burn fat after the exercise stops. Whereas in like a zone 1, 2, or 3, as soon as you sort of stop the exercise, that fat consumption or that fat burn tends to stop as well. And that afterburn, of course, aids in weight loss. If you are burning more calories at rest than you otherwise would, then you are going to naturally, or maybe not naturally, but more easily put yourself into a caloric deficit. And it is, of course, a potent metabolic stimulus for the insulin sensitization and all the other reasons that I just mentioned. The other reason why sprinting is very important, my Betties, is for muscular power, and specifically fast twitch or type 2 muscle fibers. These muscle fibers are uniquely concerned with power and speed, and they often are dormant in more moderate and low intensity activities. We tend to lose them both in size and in absolute number as we age. So when we are sprinting, when we're doing high intensity interval training, we are activating these muscle fibers that are often lying dormant in everyday life, and they are going to help to preserve muscle mass, which we lose as we age, muscle strength, and agility, all those things we lose as we age. And sprinting, in essence, basically teaches the neuromuscular system to stay fast and to stay powerful by activating these type 2 muscle fibers. The other thing that I'll mention is that sprinting also promotes muscle building hormone responses. So again, study linked in the show notes. One study showed that women had a larger growth hormone spike after an all-out 30-second sprint than men. And this supports muscle maintenance, right? Sprinting alone is not going to keep your muscles there. Obviously, you need, for muscle hypertrophy, you need to be resistance training, moving close to failure. We've already talked about that on the podcast ad nauseum, but sprinting is going to help with maintaining the muscle that you already have, okay? Sprinting also is going to positively impact your bone density and your connective tissue. And this is particularly true if you are engaging in sprinting on the ground. So if you're running, let's say, because it's very high impact in nature, and I'll talk a little bit about sort of the trade-off for some women with high impact versus low impact in a minute. But if you're someone who loves to sprint like on a track or something, or even just like down the block on your street, it is going to stimulate bone growth, and it's going to help preserve and even add on to the bone mineral density that you have. And for women, we know osteoporosis, osteopenia, these are huge risk factors for us in our postmenopausal or in our menopausal life. And even if you are someone, again, when we look at any type of running, when we look at short distance runners, so people who like sprinters versus long distance runners, so endurance runners, the sprinters are they usually will show better spine, hip, and femur bone density compared to, the 4,000 and the 800 or the 8,000 meter runners. So if you compare those to like the 100-meter dash, 200-meter, 400-meter, they're going to have better bone density generally than those who are running for longer distances. And so we'll talk in a little bit about how running can be a bit of a trade-off. Like we want to sort of balance the idea of injury risk with the activity that we're choosing. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how I typically full bias is on display here. I really prefer bike sprints, and I'll tell you some of the reasons why in a moment. But if you're someone who runs properly and you have good technique and you've been a sprinter for years and it's been on the ground, that is a great way also to preserve bone density and connective tissue as well. And of course, it's like minimal time, max return. Like the one thing that I love, or that I'm finding that I love in midlife, is leverage. Like I love efficiency and I love leverage. For me, like one of the most exciting aspects of, a high intensity interval training session is the efficiency. You don't need like every day, you don't need to be doing it. It's like literally once or twice a week, maximally 15, 18 minutes, like maybe 20 minutes at max, 1 to 2 times a week for 20 minutes, like sign me up. I would rather do that than hours and hours and hours and hours on the treadmill or on the elliptical or on the bike or whatever. Like I want to be in and out. I have packed schedules, as I know you do as well. And so I love the idea that leveraging a very high intensity workout, I can do it for a shorter amount of time with a less frequency per week, and I am going to get the same, if not better, outcomes in terms of type 2 fiber preservation, lipid profiles, metabolic profiles, etc. So let's talk a little bit more about VO2 max, if you'll spare me just a few moments to go into why this is important. If you've ever heard of longevity experts online talking about VO2 max, like what is it? Well, it's basically peak oxygen consumption. Okay. So your body's ability to maximally extract oxygen during high intensity exercise is going to be measured in milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. So basically, how much oxygen can you take in relative to your body weight per minute? And this is basically reflecting the integrated efficiency between lungs, heart, blood, muscles in delivering and using oxygen. Okay. In kind of more regular language, if you will, or practical terms, a higher VO2 max means that you can sustain vigorous activity for a longer period of time with less fatigue. That's basically the translation, right? So if you are an elite athlete, typically elite athletes have very high VO2 maxes just by the nature of their training and how long they've been doing it. But everyday individuals like you and like me, we can also have higher VO2 maxes if we are doing the right things that we're going to talk about in this podcast, of course. And then we can be more, quote unquote, in shape, or more, we can have better fitness and be metabolically healthier if we are regularly engaging in activities that drive up our VO2 max. Okay. And as you've probably guessed, VO2 max, like many things, declines with aging, largely due to decreased cardiac output and muscle mass, right? So it's like this use it or lose it phenomenon. After the age of 30, sedentary individuals are going to see VO2 max declines something like 5 to 10% per decade, which is crazy. And that actually parallels very much with type 2 muscle fiber degradation as well. Like you can lose up to 10% per decade, in some cases even more if you're not being strategic about it. So this is like typical aging, let's say, but you and I, we're not typical, right? That's why you listen to the show. It is completely malleable or modifiable based on your movement diversification portfolio that we are going to talk about today. And I want you to think about movement diversification the same way that you might think about, I don't know, like your financial portfolio, right? You're not just going to put all of your invested money into one stock, hopefully not, or maybe not just Bitcoin, right? It's gambling. But you're going to have a varied portfolio of ETFs and stocks, and you're going to have US exposure and European exposure and Asian exposure and emerging markets, blah, 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 right? Can you tell that I'm like super into financial literacy right now? So the same is true with your movement diversification. You're not just going to do sprinting. You are going to do resistance training. You are going to do Pilates or mobility or different things that are going to help mitigate risk in different areas. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how high intensity interval training boosts your VO2 max. Okay. So when we are repeatedly pushing near or at your current maximum, the high intensity interval training is going to cause your heart muscle to strengthen and your blood volume to increase. Okay, so your heart's gonna get stronger, and your ability to move blood around is going to become more efficient. That's an example of leverage. And over weeks, the body, if you're consistently doing this, your body is going to now grow more mitochondria in the muscle cells, right? So the mitochondria, we know they use oxygen to produce energy, right? So these cellular pathways for mitochondrial biogenesis are maximally activated with as little as 20 seconds of all-out activity. Like, ladies, can we talk about leverage and efficiency? 20 seconds. I'm asking you to go 20 seconds, all in, ovaries to the wall, like you are in it, right? So that means that these short sprints are sending this really powerful signal to the body to improve the oxygen processing machinery, aka the mitochondria. And it's also going to overturn some of the mitochondria that are not as efficient, and it's going to promote the birth, if you will, of new mitochondria. So people might call this mitochondrial biogenesis. Big word, means just new mitochondria. Okay. Here's a cool study. Adults doing 3 8-minute. So it's the total workout is 8 minutes. And within that, there's 40-second re-hit cycling sessions. Okay. So this is basically 40 seconds in total of max training. So this is 2 20-second sprints. So the whole workout is 8 minutes. And in that 8-minute workout, you have 2 sprints that are 20 seconds long. They saw a 12% improvement in VO2 max in 8 weeks. That is remarkable. Okay. And this outperformed groups doing traditional longer hits. So this 8-minute, 40-second, this is called re-hit. And this outperformed traditional longer hit routines in the same study. So that to me is very, very cool. And this is sort of bridging, for at least for me, why I'm really into, I'll talk to you a little bit about cycling and why I love cycling in just a moment. But you can be any age and profit from here. Like it's not just like before menopause, perimenopause, like it doesn't matter how old you are. Like the best time to have started your HIIT training was like 10 years ago. And the second best time is today. It's the same with resistance training, right? This is like it's like today is the oldest you've ever been and the youngest you'll ever be. So why not start now? Okay. So let's go into a little bit more of the science of fast twitch muscle fibers. I know that I've already given you a little bit of like, we lose it as we age. It's a use it or lose it phenomenon. But I do actually want to talk a little bit about estrogen and the impact that perimenopause might have on our slow twitch fibers as well. So I mentioned starting as early as our 30s, muscle mass begins to decline, right? Something like 3 to 8, sometimes upwards of 10% loss per decade after the age of 30, if you're not being strategic, like strength training and doing HIIT training as well. And I've mentioned already, it's not just size that you lose, but it's also function. So it's like the strength that you have, that maximal strength and power output, that maximal forceful contraction that you can do in any single given activity. Now, when we are thinking about an 80-year-old, which it's very likely that you and I are going to reach 80, the average person may have lost 30 to 40% of their muscle fibers, of their type 2 muscle fibers, compared to when they were young adults. And the decline tends to be selective in type 2 muscle fibers, the fast twitch, high force fibers that we've been talking about. The type 1 muscle fibers, particularly in women, are relatively better preserved with age. Okay. So we have this as part of the aging, some people call aging a disease. I'm willing to call it like entropy right now. I don't know if I'm quite willing to call aging a disease, but it is definitely a move towards disorganization. What tends to happen is there's few total fibers, there's less type 2 fibers available, and there is a shift towards more slow twitch fibers. Now there's many implications for this, like falling. Like you need to train up your hip flexors, let's say, to maintain their type 2 muscle fibers. Because if you are falling forward and your center of gravity is moving forward, your hip flexors need to have that fast twitch. They need to be able to move quickly to be able to get in front of how you're falling so you don't fall and break a hip. Okay, so when you're in your 40s and your 50s, so these are your perimenopausal, menopausal years, the loss of these fibers is often really subtle, right? You may notice it as like a plateau or a drop in your athletic explosiveness, or the other way that you might find it is a slower recovery from very intense efforts, right? So it's going to take you in the context of weightlifting, it's going to take you longer to recover from leg day than maybe it once did. Or with your sprinting, you may notice that your time you might not be able to cover the same amount of distance that you were able to. Or if you're sprinting on a bike, let's say, that your watt output, like the watts that you're able to maximally perform during a sprint is going to start to lower, or that it's taking you a long time to recover from either of those activities. So the degradation of those fast twitch fibers, that loss of explosive power, is why you might be able to, like, maybe if you are 65, or like a 65 or 70-year-old, they might be able to still walk or cycle for long distances because their slow twitch, fibers are still intact, but they may struggle to sprint or even like to lift a heavy suitcase quickly. Like if you see, on those conveyor belts, once you get off the plane, like they may struggle to kind of get in there quickly and like grab the baggage off of the conveyor belt. And that also conveys, like I was saying, that fall risk, right? So if you're losing those type 2 muscle fibers in your hip flexors, your ability to really move your feet quickly is going to be degraded. Now, all this doom and gloom is like we're losing 3 to 10% a year, all this kind of stuff. The good news is that you absolutely can be doing something about it. Obviously, sprinting is going to be part of that, which is going to slow, but in a lot of cases reverse some of these age-related changes that you see in function and in absolute number of these fibers. So when we're thinking about sprinting, I typically have a bias towards lower impact sprinting. So I really, really love a bike sprint. And the reason for that is, and I'll put a qualifier here and say that if you're someone who is a sprinter on the ground, like you've been running forever and you've demonstrated that you have good technique and you can run properly, girl, like have at it. I think that sprinting on the ground is awesome. What I often find is that when I'm looking at mechanics of someone sprinting, it's very rare that someone can do that well. And so the propensity for injury there is much higher. And so I worry about recommending sprinting on the ground for someone that I have never worked with personally, especially when you can control it like on a bike, right? And the bike, like we'll talk, you're going to get with the bike, like you're going to be biasing the quads and the glutes, but it's lower impact, right? So you may trade off some of the, I was mentioning earlier, the bone mineral density and generally connective tissue respond well to when you are running on the ground. But I would rather you make that up with strength training, and then you are mitigating your risk of injury by sprinting on a bike. That's just my personal opinion. But I will say that if you're someone who is a sprinter and you can demonstrate, like demonstrably, you can run with good mechanics, like most people do not, continue to do that. But if you're someone who is new to sprinting, new to HIIT training, I definitely like the impact to be lower to preserve your joints. This is something that I think is often lost in the conversation around muscle in general. Everyone wants to talk about like lift as heavy as you can. And it's like, yes, and you should lift as heavy as you can. You should work towards muscle failure, but you also want to preserve your joints. So when you're lifting really, really heavy, like in that 5 to 7 rep range, your joints and the connective tissues in and around those articulations need more time to heal, right? Versus if you're doing something, call it more moderate weight, but a higher rep range. Still, again, working to muscle failure, but this is really why I like to cycle the way that you're training. Like you're always trying to lift heavy. But if you're a woman who's still cycling, even if it's a regular, I definitely like to cycle how you lift because we want to give the connective tissue time to rest. And when you're doing a lighter weight with more volume, like with more repetitions, that is often easier on the joints than it is doing something like 5 to 7 reps as heavy as you can, or like a 1 or 2 rep, like you're doing 1 or 2 reps. Like a lot of power lifters will do like 2 reps. I think that that's too aggressive for most women, particularly in perimenopause and menopause, who might be new to training. So let me be clear. You need to be strong. You need to be driving towards strength. You need to be driving towards hypertrophy, but you also have to consider your joints. Like you cannot squat if you don't have knees. You know what I'm saying? You can't do a push-up if your shoulders and your wrists are destroyed. So we want to be giving the articulations and the connective tissue, ligaments, tendons, etc., time to recover from heavy lifts. It's not that you shouldn't do heavy lifts. You absolutely should, but that shouldn't be the primary way that you lift. You should be cycling through lots of different volume, lots of different reps, etc. Okay, so now I have that little tangent. I want to come back to talking about estrogen. So obviously your estrogen, perimenopause and certainly menopause is an estrogen deficient state. And women will typically experience a drop in muscle performance during the menopausal transition. So when they are moving from perimenopause to menopause, and even just a broader, like age 45 to 55, like if you're in that drop zone between age 45 to 55, many of you are going to experience an accelerated drop in muscle performance. And that's because estrogen is anabolic, right? So it has muscle preserving properties. It tells the muscles to grow. So when we are seeing some of these ovarian hormones, of course, estrogen being one of them, failing, then your muscle mass and your muscle strength tend to decline rapidly. And it's often the case that you will notice strength declines first. And before you notice mass, right? Before you notice a loss of muscle, you will see a loss of strength. And there's some studies that report in the 5 years post-menopause, women on average will see about a 15% decrease in overall muscle mass and a 20% decrease in strength if they're not being strategic. And that's even when you're accounting for normal aging. Okay. A lot of women will say that they like that myogenic tone, like what people will say toned. God, I hate this word, but we'll use it anyway. But, when people will say like, I've lost my muscle tone, it's just basically how the muscle looks at rest. It also seems that in that perimenopausal to menopause transition, that there is a decline there as well. And certainly lower estrogen is associated with higher muscle protein breakdown and reduced muscle protein synthesis. All that to say means that it's harder to maintain or to build muscle tissue. Not impossible. It's not impossible, but it's harder. And then, of course, there's the body composition shifts that come in perimenopause as well, right? There's often an increase in fatty infiltration of the muscle, this like marbling effect, this like fatty marbling in the muscle when estrogen drops. So this can really impair the muscle quality as well as the power output. So it's like the quality and the quantity of muscle declines in perimenopause because we have this declining estrogen. Now, specifically with fast twitch muscle fibers, estrogen appears to be particularly important for type 2 muscle fiber maintenance. So when we see that estrogen withdrawal or that, overall decline in estrogen levels, women will tend to disproportionately lose more type 2 muscle fibers than they will type 1. So that loss of explosive power and that functional capacity, in essence, is because estrogen normally helps to keep muscles strong and fast, partially by supporting muscle turnover and muscle protein synthesis and limiting muscle protein breakdown or cell apoptosis. And when estrogen is low, it seems like studies have found an increased marker of muscle degradation, like cell breakdown, which is why some women will say, like, I'm losing the tone. I can't see my muscles anymore. It seems like my muscle strength is disappearing, but also my overall muscle is disappearing as well. And then, as I've mentioned before, recovery is impaired and your inflammation tends to get ratcheted up as well. Estrogen is typically anti-inflammatory. It has many, cell membrane stabilizing effects to help with getting nutrients into the cell, helping with inflammation in general, which is, estrogen helps with like that limiting the muscle damage and speedy, like increasing the repair. So after you've had like a really hard exercise session, postmenopausal women who are not on menopausal hormone therapy often will show higher inflammatory markers and longer recovery times than premenopausal women will. And there's one study, again, it'll be linked in the show notes for those of you that want to look into it. One study was tracking exercise recovery. They found that postmenopausal women took 20% longer to recover from a comparable workout. And it was accompanied by elevated C-reactive protein, which is just a marker for inflammation, and some other inflammatory cytokines versus the controls. Now, I've already been saying this and already noticing this. You may have already felt this as well, that you just don't bounce back the way that you used to, maybe in your 20s and your 30s. And that really aligns with this physiology. That's sort of like I'm explaining to you what it's not in your mind, like you're not crazy. That is exactly what's happening. And the fast twitch muscle fibers in particular can recover more slowly in that estrogen deficient environment because we won't go into it here, but satellite cell donation or function to the muscle cell is impaired. So basically the satellite cells are these like cells all around the muscle, and you will essentially donate, like you under the influence of estrogen and testosterone, the satellite cell, these cells will sort of donate themselves. They're almost like stem cells. They'll donate themselves to the muscle to aid in repair. And that in and of itself is impaired. Okay. So we've talked about all the things. We've talked about all the things around what happens when we are not doing high intensity interval training. We've talked about the positive benefits that HIIT training does for you in terms of cardiovascular and cholesterol and lipid and metabolic markers, how estrogen impacts our recovery. I've talked to you a little bit about why I like bike sprints a little bit better than ground sprints if you're someone who is not a regular seasoned sprinter. But let's talk a little bit about why you might consider a low impact sprint. Okay. So as I've mentioned, traditional running sprints, they're high impact by nature. Every time your foot's striking the ground, there are forces like multiples of your body weight that are being transmitted through your bones, through your joints, and through your connective tissues. So if you have aberrant biomechanics, like if you have bad biomechanics when you're running, over time, you are going to develop injuries in the connective tissue, in the joints, or in the bones themselves. So while it might be true that running on the ground, if you're doing it properly, can confer better bone density, it's hard on the joints, it carries a higher injury risk, okay? So common sprinting injuries that I used to see in the clinic all the time, hamstring strains. Maybe the number one thing I saw was hamstring strains, followed very closely by Achilles tendon injuries. Also other things that were super common were shin splints and knee pain. That was the other big one. So, and that was often with like that burst, like the explosive training, there was often like a weird pain, usually in the medial aspect of the knee. I would often find it was like on the inner part of the knee. I have some theories about why that is. Glute weakness is one of them. However, those are the common things that I would see. I'd see hamstring, Achilles, shin splints. I see the whole gamut. And so if you're a woman in perimenopause where maybe you have some arthritis or developing osteopenia, or you've walked a certain way, or you've never run your whole life, like taking up running at this stage of the game, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I'm just saying that the likelihood that you're going to do it well over the long term, like you can probably do it well for a little bit, but over a longer delta, the injury risk I think is higher. So I like sprints on a bike. You can also do it on other things like ellipticals and whatever, because I feel like that is a safer way over a longer period of time, over a longer delta, to get the HIIT stimulus. So you have like the hormonal effects, you have the fast twitch muscle preservation, all the things we've been talking about, without the injury risk, right? And the whole goal with HIIT training is push the heart and the lungs as hard as you can, so you get these specific adaptations that we've been talking about. I feel like bikes, ellipticals, unequivocally gentler on the joints. I think that those who are opting for bike sprints You want to make sure that you're using sufficient resistance. Like sprinting on a bike isn't about a fast spin with no load, right? Like you need to have resistance on the bike, because that would just, if you didn't, it would just be, if you didn't have any resistance on it, it'd just be like mostly heart rate stuff with like very little muscle recruitment. Like you have to be pushing against a strong load. So you want to crank up the resistance so that 10 to 30 seconds of sprinting or pedaling on the bike feels like you're climbing like a really, really steep hill at maximum effort. Like it feels very, very heavy. That's really going to create the muscular overload that's going to be akin to running, right? So if you're running like that running acceleration, you really want to crank up the resistance on the bike or elliptical or whatever you're doing so that you're pushing against a significant load. So there's lots of different types of bikes. There's like the assault bike, there's spin bikes, there's dedicated hit bikes. Like I'm going to talk to you about the Carol bike in just a moment. But a typical cycling sprint might be something like 5-minute warm up, 4 15-second all out sprints. So 15 seconds, everything that you got, and do that 4 times with like, call it 45 seconds to a minute of easy cycling, like no resistance in between that, and then a cool down. And then of course, over time, applying the principles of progressive overload, you can increase the sprint duration, you can decrease the recovery time, or you can add more sprints, right? Sparingly as well. If you're a runner, if you are someone who is very familiar with running sprints, or, someone who has demonstrably shown good biomechanics, I would actually start with hill sprints. So maybe not even running on a flat surface, but actually running up a gentle hill. That can actually reduce some of the impact naturally and enforce good mechanics. And it's also going to limit your top speed because you can't go all out on a hill sprint, but you're still going to be working really, really, really heavy. And you're also going to reduce, this is like the doctor in me, like you're going to also reduce the hamstring strain risk. Okay. So if you're going up the hill, usually it's a little easier in terms of injury risk as well. Again, the goal is to push yourself really hard, but in all cases, anytime you feel a sharp pain in the joints, you must stop immediately. That is a huge red flag. This is why I love low impact, right? Because they're joint friendly generally, and they are usually a joint friendly path to high intensity fitness. All right, so let me talk about my favorite bike. Is literally the most favorite piece of equipment I think I have ever owned, which is the Carol bike. And they use something called REHIT. So REHIT stands for Reduced Exertion High Intensity Interval Training. And it's basically a twist on high intensity interval training. So it aims to get you maximum benefits with even less exercise time than like a typical HIIT workout. So to be clear, you can do bike sprints at your gym, and I would typically start off with that 4x15 that I mentioned. But if you're doing something like REHIT, you can do something like 2 or 3 short sprints that are like 10 to 20 seconds each, and you're going to get that increase in VO2 max. You're going to get that increase in metabolic benefits, cholesterol and lipid profiles, heart health, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea around REHIT, the reason why it's scientifically validated and the reason why we're very interested in it, and the reasons why I'm very interested in it, is that there's research showing that the most potent stimulus from HIIT comes from the first sprint that you do, or maybe even the first 2 sprints. So like the maximum stimulus, like when you're doing like that 4x15, you're giving like the first 2 times that you do that is the maximum. You're getting the most potent stimulus in the first or the second time that you do it. And that's usually due to the rapid glycogen depletion that happens in those first 2 times, which signals for that adaptation. So what happens when you're sprinting all out is that your muscles are going to supply glycogen for your muscles to continue, like sort of stored glycogen in the muscle. They're going to supply that so that you can continue doing the sprint for the 15 seconds. But you're going to get the most rapid decline in glycogen in the first 2 sprints. Okay. So REHIT is basically asking the question, what if I just do the bare minimum? So I just do the bare minimum, all out sprints, 1, 2, maybe 3 times, and then also baking in a lot of recovery in between those sprints. Can I still get the same benefit? And it seems like you can. So there was Dr. Niels Villard and colleagues found that as few as 2 20-second, so 20-second sprints 2 times, all out bike sprints with a 3-minute rest in between each sprint, done 3 times a week, could improve VO2 max, blood pressure, insulin sensitivity nearly as much as a traditional 30 to 40 minute endurance workout. So for me, this is like, again, back to this idea of leverage, right? It means that you can get fit, like VO2 max fit, all the metabolic benefits, all the things, with literally 1 minute of intense exercise, right? So it's like you're doing the 22 times 20 seconds, and then you're getting, your warm up and your little recoveries in between. So for 1 minute of exercise, you're getting the same benefits that like a 30 to 40 minute workout would give you. So the only caveat here is that those sprints literally have to be at 100% max effort. Like you can't half-ass it, you have to full-ass it. You know what I'm saying? Like you have to go in and give it your 100% maximum full effort. So this is why I love the Carol bike. So Carol, just so you know, stands for Cardiovascular Optimization Logic. So CAR from cardiovascular and then optimization logic. So this is basically an AI-driven bike that is going to, during the sprint, keep the resistance, like as you pedal harder, it is going to adjust the resistance for you. So one of the annoying things that you'll find when you are manually doing this at the gym is that if you pedal harder, the resistance, you got to manually crank up the resistance, which can be difficult to concentrate on if you only have 15 seconds to do it. So there's this AI driven resistance technology that's built into the Carol bike. So the bike software is instantly going to adjust the resistance to the sort of optimal level for the user, for you, to achieve your maximum power output. And Carol, it's like, how do I know what's optimal? Carol's AI uses like your previous performance data. So there's like some tests that you do before you start doing the re-hit workouts. And it's going to look at things like pedaling power, your heart rate, your fatigue rate from your previous rides. And it's going to challenge you to your limit, like your 100% limit for those 10 or 20 seconds. But it's like, it's only 10 or 20 seconds. Like we can do anything for 10 or 20 seconds, like twice a week, like count me in, right? So, and the AI is also going to account for whether you're like a bit fresh, a bit tired. Like it can kind of tell, like there's a heart rate monitor that comes with it. So it can sort of tell your maximum load. And according to Carol and their co-founder, even variations in your motivation or sleep are detected through subtle changes in your output, and the algorithm will adapt the ride. So that for me is cool. The result here, of course, is a very efficient, very personalized workout in every session. And the instant resistance feature means that the bike can go from like easy pedaling to all out loaded, full on sprint in like a split second, which is really critical when you're thinking about re-hit. Like you really want to get to that 100% max effort. And so there's no like lag time ramping up. Like there's no wasted seconds in like kind of ramping up to your max. Like you can go all out and the AI will like push back on you instantly. So a typical Carol workout, this is something that I typically do, is like a 2 minute, usually it's like 2 minute warm. I think it's like 2 minutes, maybe a little bit more, 2 minute warm up, then a 20-second max sprint, 3 minutes of recovery. Cycling. So you're just like easy pedaling, catching your breath. It takes you through some breath exercises as well. And then another 20-second sprint and then a 3-minute cool down. And like literally that's it. I often will do this when I have like about 10 minutes, if I have like 10 minutes before a call, because the total time on that re-hit workout is 8 minutes and 40 seconds. So it's like, I have 8 minutes and 40 seconds. I got 10 minutes and you're not sweating. Like that's the other beautiful thing too, is I do not break a sweat. So I could be wearing full makeup if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see I got my eyeliner on, I got lipstick on, etc. So I will not ruin my makeup. I'm not sweaty. I'm not out of breath. By the time that 3-minute cool down's finished, I just get off the bike and I'm talking the same way that, that I am talking with you now. And so the studies that they've done at Carol, they market these like they call them micro workouts, which is totally what they are, but they deliver the same benefits as like a 45-minute run in under 9 minutes, right? 8 minutes and 40 seconds. And this claim is based on their peer-reviewed studies. The Western Colorado University Humans Performance Lab conducted an independent trial, which was funded by the American Council on Exercise. They had participants do 3 Carol bike re-hit sessions per week for 8 weeks. And they compared those results doing traditional HIIT, so the 4x15 or whatever, And the Carol group saw a 12% increase in VO2 max, that cardiorespiratory fitness, significantly outpacing the hits, like the gains that in the hit group. And this 12% improvement is on par with what might take you several months of like moderate training, right? So if you were doing like 30 minutes, 40 minutes, like 3, 4, 5 times a week, it's on par with that. And so I'll link it in the show notes, but the study was published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health in 2022, which of course lends to the science around Carol and the whole idea of rehit in general. And then the other thing I'll mention for those of you that are interested in weight loss and that post-exercise calorie burn, Carol, another study published in the same journal in 2021, they looked at Carol's effect on metabolism and post-exercise oxygen consumption. And it found that the Carol Intense ride led to significantly greater post-exercise calorie burn than a matched moderate or even vigorous exercise session. The afterburn lasted for over 2 hours and expended double the calories of a steady state workout. Again, highlighting, the metabolic punch that a high intensity or specifically rehit workout can give you. So, who's it for? The Carol bike is I'll say I use the Carol bike. My kids use the Carol bike because they want to improve their speed. There's a couple of different I'll say torture lightly, but they have like the Norwegian 4x4s. But for someone, if you are a perimenopausal woman with like a packed schedule, this is super ideal for that audience because you don't have a lot of time. If you have 8 minutes and 40 seconds, we all have that. You can get in 2 of those sessions a week and you're golden. Like you're improving your VO2 max, you're preserving your type 2 muscle fibers, and you're preserving your power output. So I love this for perimenopausal women, but it's kind of for everyone. Like my whole family uses it. My kids use it. They have their own profiles on it as well. So for me, I'm not a huge fan of AI generally. I find that it can maybe cause more harm than good. But in this case, I think this is the best use case for AI. I love the idea of this tech, like AI and this tech, being able to reduce the ramp up time, being able to detect how ready I am to push, and then kind of figuring out how much resistance to give me. I use the Carol bike at least 2 times a week. I probably get on it like 3 times a week to do those rehit rides, those real quick, like 2 by 20 second workouts. It's my favorite piece of equipment in the home. So if you are interested in finding out more about the Carol bike, there is going to be a link in the show notes for you. If you head over to Carol Bike and use code BETTER, I also believe that there is a discount there for you as well. So I hope that you enjoyed this solo cast. I know I haven't done one in a while, but I definitely want to be doing more of these on the show. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you want, what science you want me to cover, how you enjoyed this one, and what your thoughts are. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.